It's been over 3 years since I last added to this series, and it's nearly 5 years since I started building my CNC machine. They say this game demands more determination than intelligence, and for me to call it an adventure is actually spot on. Mine is an ambitious journey with a clear vision of where I want to get to, but no idea at the start of how to get there. And so it's largely trial and error, with a lot of error on my part. In fact, the latest mishap was little short of a catastrophic disaster, and sheer luck that I recovered from it. In linking up a water pump to the massive spindle that I fitted, a hose connection blew, and enough water to circulate a pond instantly drenched the exposed circuitry of the CNC controller. No doubt the epitaph on my tombstone will be, "He couldn't have scripted it." I fumbled for the pump power switch, and fortunately the circuit board was not connected, so I used a hairdryer and a fan heater to dry it all out. Now, the day before, I wasted a couple of hours trying to solder the connections in an almost impossible to work on aviation plug, and wire in 4 wires on a cable I found on eBay after much searching. It had to be shipped from the USA. I hired a local computer electronics guy to connect the cable to the VFD. I'm colorblind, and it takes me about 4 hours just to wire a plug. Now, he discovered I'd wired the earth to the wrong pole, and my solder joints were so bad they just fell off. Now, why didn't the spindle come with a made-up cable, and indeed why did it not come with any instructions at all? So, talking about needing help, a really kind guy living about 30 miles away answered my request on a CNC forum and helped over a baffling problem which only somebody with experience could possibly diagnose. I had missed out a washer when building the machine framework, and it resulted in odd behaviour on a stepper motor and the gantry travelling on a twisted frame. Now, I'm sure you're curious to see what spindles I've tried out so far, and why I've settled for this monster, but let me first finish the story about the near catastrophic disaster. It was one thing drowning the controller circuit board in water, but it was by sheer chance I checked on the fan heater that I left to dry it out. To my horror, I re-entered my workshop to find the circuit board melting. I had set the fan heater far too high, and the 3D printed backing boards were deforming in front of my eyes. It was probably seconds away from complete meltdown, but I rescued it before the tiny wires and other parts melted. So I immediately switched the fan to cold mode and held the hot plastic parts in place to reform their flatness. Ouch. I don't know. Just lately I've been doing some stupid things, and I wonder if I'm just juggling with too many projects at once. So, back to the plot. Let's look at the spindles I tried out. And while I'm talking about them, let's show some shots of my making the various spindle mounts. I purchased a Makita 1500 watt router, and I adapted it, hence the plywood sleeve. Rigidity of the motor head or spindle is obviously a requirement, and I'm also aware of noise and vibration, so using wood is not a bad choice. As a beginner, I should have gone for a tiny router, such as the one recommended by the CNC kit manufacturer, but I wanted to control the router and the RPM ultimately through the CAM software, that is when I've learned how to use it. Also, I want to use my collection of half-inch router cutters supplied to me over the years by Trend when I wrote various routing books and produced my routing videos. So my adventure into CNC woodworking is very much about seeing what the machine can do, and for a total beginner like me, and especially after 5 years of building the machine, I just want to get it running and do basic operations such as surface skimming, grooving and edge profiling. And so this is where a pendant controller is perfect to start with, to get a feel of the machine and the cutter engaging with the wood. Now I know this is an unconventional approach, but for me as an individual not of the generation brought up on video games, I find even the most basic software a huge learning curve, and in fact completely off-putting. I've requested on CNC forums several times for easy point and squirt software, but each time I'm being referred to Vectric V-Carve or similar. It's a major brick wall. Ask any kid given a new bike for Christmas. He just wants to get on it and not have to endure a 6-week theoretical training course. So the next somewhat expensive purchase was this little 1 horsepower Mafell spindle, again air cooled, and with a small collet which limits my creative options. This one runs fairly quiet, but in the back of my mind I've always wanted to use a water-cooled large spindle that takes any size of cutter and runs quieter. So what you've been seeing here are the various mounting brackets I made or adapted, and you know I don't regret building the CNC machine because in the long run I will understand a lot more about CNC woodworking and even beef up the machine if needed. It really is an excellent machine and British made. Okay, so with my 1/2-inch router cutters in mind, I eventually decided to fit the only spindle that has a 1/2-inch collet, and it's this massive 2.2 kilowatt water-cooled spindle, massive as in heavy, and not recommended for this machine setup, but others have used them. The spindle kit, apart from including a far too powerful water pump as we've seen earlier, included a rather crude cast aluminium collar that didn't fit. So I purchased 2 precision engineered clamps on eBay. But I envisaged slowing everything down and taking light cuts to avoid flexing of the machine. In a future video I'll show the wiring of the VFD to the computer. But let's just mention briefly now the wiring of the spindle to the VFD for any viewer faced with the same challenge. Without any instructions supplied with the kit, I can't recall a cable coming with it. I did a lot of online research for the correct 4-wire screen cable and watched a few videos on making the connections, and even then I got it wrong. So suffice to say that terminal number 3 on the aviation plug is the earth and screen wire, and not number 4. And the other wires can be experimented with if the spindle runs in reverse. I learned the importance of a high quality solder gun when I was looking over the shoulder of my electrician. Well, I've packed quite a lot into this long overdue video. What else is there to say? You'll have noticed I've yet to level the spoil board as this flat bottom cutter reveals. And yes, it happened. The cutter dropped onto the spoil board when I switched the controller off. I guess it's the weight of the spindle, and some woodworkers use a gas strut to remedy it. As I say, I just wanted to get the machine running before I fine-tune it. It's a bit of a headache adjusting the bearing guide wheels precisely. Some are just right and others are just too loose or too tight. I will have to build a box for my water reservoir to seal it, as my workshop has a dehumidifier running. But at last I'm confident to move forward with this project. Before I get stuck into learning the software, I really need to consolidate all my switches at my control center and have one overriding emergency stop button. Ah, I nearly forgot. Let's check the sound level of the spindle. Well, I'm running it at 15,000 and 18,000 RPM. I mean, that's just a guess for the kind of speeds I'll need. And my observation is it runs much quieter than the Mafell or Makita before engaging in the wood. And of course I'm using a big cutter here, so I reckon it's overall still quieter. Of course there's extra noise coming from the power supply fan and the water pump. Oh yes, I always understood that a router really isn't designed for CNC, so that might invite a few of you to make comments. But one thing I noticed about the fan on air-cooled motorheads is they tend to blow debris around, but with the water-cooled spindle the debris tends to settle. Well, that's handy until I get to the stage of dealing with dust extraction and dust shoes. It goes on. And you know, the part of the adventure I'm really looking forward to is the devices I'm going to devise for holding the work, including an opening in the spoil board to cut joints on the end of pieces of wood, similar to my Omni jig featured in one of my routing videos. Well, thanks for watching, and please catch up with other episodes if you've missed them.